if you want to type in the chat, where in your body do you feel grief and loss? And I really think it's very important to be present in our bodies and listen to our bodies, and be very much in tune with what they're saying. And our bodies are very, very wise, and a lot of times I think it's very easy to sort of want to be step away from our bodies and not be present in them, because a lot of these, especially with grief and like other more difficult emotions and comfortable emotions, it can be hard to like sit with them um and really just see what they're saying. But all of our emotions and all of our bodily sensations have something to say to us that is important. And so so I encourage everyone to just kind of think about, when you are thinking about grief and loss, like where do you feel that? For me, I really feel like grief and loss really happened for me like somewhere a little bit like in my heart, maybe a little bit like under my heart. Like that's where and that's, I feel like, probably something that is common, is feeling that loss in near the heart area, near your solar plexus. Um and so grief and death are not things that are like easy to talk about necessarily, especially because yeah, they're hard. And I think a lot of times we kind of shy away from talking about them, especially here in this colonial US culture. And so but these things are really what makes us human. It is a part of our lives, and I think it's really important to talk about it. And I think that um grief is best processed collectively and not as like an individually. And so I think it's important to have these conversations about like what grief feels like, and to allow ourselves to express that full range of emotions, whether it's sobbing or wailing, screaming, whatever that looks like for you. I encourage everyone to really like lean into that and allow it to be released. Um and then I also want to mention that that grief isn't necessarily just about death, or losing somebody from this earthly realm. There's other things that we can grieve for, and that is grieving things that we didn't receive or haven't received, or also how we've changed. So grieving maybe a part of us that we've lost, or the ending of relationships. A lot of the some of the things that I've grieved about is not really having, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my the grief from my mother. So some of the grief that I felt around that was just not having the mother that I felt that I needed or wanted in my life. And that was one grief that I had to process. And then I recently found out that she has passed away. So there's also this grieving of her actually leaving this earthly realm. And those are two very, somewhat separate grieving processes. They feel and look a little bit different for me. But they were both valid. But I do feel like a lot of times there is certain types of grief that aren't seen as valid, like grieving the ending of something, like grieving this not having this relationship that I needed with her, is not as validated as actually losing her from this realm that we're all on. And so and I just want to encourage everyone that all grief is very, very valid, and that it's all, you don't have there's so many different things that we can grieve about. And it's again important to really lean into us and lean into that, and allow those feelings to move through you. And I think one of the ways that you can allow for grief to move through you is to write about it, which is something that we're gonna be doing a little bit later today. it can be something that's very difficult, but I think it can also be very, very healing to really think about just the different things, different losses that we've had in our lives, and writing about them. And it just doesn't have to be necessarily like a poem that you're gonna publish somewhere. This could just be something that you would keep in a journal. Even though I do believe that the sharing process is also an important part of this. And this could look like sharing in a workshop like this, or sharing with just a close friend. But I do, or being, if you're in a, joining some a grief support group, or so on. I think that the sharing part of that is also important. And then, if you are someone who was wanting to gravitate towards sharing your writing, having a journal is somewhere where you can have like seedlings for poems, essays, or stories that you can then continue to work on and share with a larger group, or publish it, which is what I've which is what I've done. A lot of my the poetry collections that I have and the memoir that I'm working on is all things that I got from my journal. Um, I'm just gonna check the chat real quick, and thank you everyone for for answering the question. And I see a lot of chest and throat, and yeah, the heart area, the heart space, and the throat. Yes, the throat is definitely like another area that I definitely feel like is very something that comes up for me a lot, that I find myself writing about, is feeling like there's something in my throat when I'm feeling a little bit of grief. And like um and yeah, the esophagus, that's, I don't know if there's, I don't think there's any, I mean, weird is good. And I also just, want to validate that everything, it's like wherever you feel it, like that's just, where you feel it. Like maybe you feel your grief in your feet, and that's not, like, it's all, I think, valid. And again, something that is just good to like recognize and be aware of like where we feel these different things. um and so I am now gonna talk a little bit about ancestors. And so this is in like ancestors, I think, can be a much, I like to define ancestors kind of like a wider definition than just talking about people that like we're directly related to. So you can think about your ancestors as like, your grandmother, your great grandmother, grandfather, or so on. um and But I also like to think of ancestors as people that we're connected to through identity or shared interests. And the reason that I like to think about ancestors in this way is that I think a lot of us have been disconnected from our cultural roots because of just different forces outside of ourselves, like colonization, slavery, imperialism, forced migration, wars. All of these things have have made it so that we're sort of, in some ways, like we are not directly connected to maybe people that we are genetically related to. Like maybe, we don't actually know our great great grandfather. Like some folks do, and that's great, but a lot of folks don't know those connections because, again, of all these outside forces that have happened that have split families apart. And so and that, that doesn't mean that you don't have ancestors. And so you can think about your ancestors as being like whatever identity that you are um seeing, like, like the way that I think about it is that so my father is from Bangladesh, and I've actually never met my father or his side of the family. But I still feel very much connected to my Bengali ancestry, sort of as a whole, specifically like the Southeast Asian um region, because that is, that is part of my genetics, even if it's not like, I'm not directly related to this particular Bengali person or Southeast Asian person, there is this like shared identity through or shared ancestry through, because we are from the same region. And then also thinking about like shared interests. So like who are your like I'm into poetry and writing, so I think about who are my poetic ancestors, who are my writing ancestors, who are the people that have passed on that I look up to. And that's, I think that's also things people that, we can consider our ancestors, again, even though maybe they're not, maybe this isn't the traditional definition of what an ancestor is. And then I have a couple of discussion questions because I didn't want to hear from folks. But I do also want to make sure we get through everything, so we can like maybe if a couple folks want to share. Um and so the questions were like, can you grieve people that you've never met? And then also like, how do you, like, and then thinking about the like I guess I can like maybe explain that a little bit more as well, about grieving people that you've never met. And again, this is like talking about like your ancestors, right? Like maybe some folks that that are ancestors now that you have met in your physical realm, this earthly realm. But there's also folks that a lot of ancestors that you don't know. But I think it's also okay to grieve those people. Like the person that pops into my head is actually a writer ancestor of mine, a very recent ancestor. It was Octavia Butler. I was a very big fan of her, and she very much inspired me on my writing journey. But I've never met her. By the time I was inspired by her, she already passed on. And I still, I felt a certain type of grief for not having been able to connect with her while she was still around. So I think that, is definitely something that that we can definitely grieve people that we never met. And then second question is like, how do you honor your ancestors? So, I'm gonna talk. So I wanted to talk about a little bit about intergenerational trauma, as well as sort of the ongoing genocide that's happening in Palestine right now. And just sort of focus us or center us a little bit about, like, we live in the so-called United States. Um, and I know there's also folks that, yes, I know there's someone here from Canada, and I think, oh, Allison, yeah. And I think that this is also very much true, not just in the United States, it's also true in Canada and in other countries with with very similar histories of genocide, slavery, and bloodshed. And just I wanted us to just think about the impacts of the colonization and imperialism have had around the world, and how that's also, something to definitely, it's very heavy, and it's something else that um I think is definitely very much a grieving. Like I definitely feel a lot of heaviness, a lot of grief with what's happening right now in Palestine and other places in Congo as well, where folks are dying, and a lot of people are dying, and it's very yeah, there's a lot of atrocities that are happening. And there's also, genocides in the past, and I was thinking about Armenia, Bangladesh, and Cambodia, there's been so many numerous ones around there's also the Holocaust. There's so many uh times where there's been a lot of mass death, and just thinking about uh how, how do we grieve, how do we grieve that, and how do we take care of ourselves when there's like just global traumas that are happening, and also take actions to whether no, big or small, to try to like shift the things that are happening, that the governments that we are a part of that are doing. um and I think it's important to be able to move through that grief as well, to let us, so that we can move to action, to try to minimize or stop it in some ways. um And there was I again, my father's from Bangladesh, and there was a genocide that happened there, um by the government of Pakistan, um and that was over, there's a lot of different factors that went into it. One of them was around what language they were allowed to speak, and I wasn't I wasn't alive when this genocide happened, and so it didn't like directly impact me, but it is still something that when I read about it, I still feel a lot of like anguish and sadness and anger that these things happened. And so I wanted us to just think about like, what does it mean to like grieve like mass death, and what does that look like? And I don't know if I really have like an answer to this question, but just thinking about the way that like there's traumas that have maybe don't directly impact us, meaning that we maybe weren't alive during this period, but our ancestors were, and that's intergenerational trauma part of it, where it's goes, it's in our DNA. It's passed down that way, and it's also um yeah, there's like when our parents and their parents and their parents have gone through something, it kind of like it impacts us in some ways, and there's still that effect that's happening to us, even if it didn't directly happen to our bodies. And so just just thinking about how to move through that, also thinking about the genocide that happened in on this land, with the indigenous folks, and how that's affected in different indigenous communities here, and here in the United States, and also here in Canada, as well. And also thinking about the enslavement of African peoples and how that's affected folks as well. And so all of those things, I think, definitely, um there's, yeah, I think that there's also grief that happens around those things. But so yeah, I just wanted to time for everything. But elegies, just really quickly, there are it's a form of poetry that's it's pretty, I mean, it's again, like, death is something that is very universal to the human experience. And elegies have been, so are very old as well. The word elegy comes from the Greek word elegia. It means lament. So it's a poem for the dead. And these poems consider the meaning of death, offer consolation. They also speak to a broad sense of loss and sadness. Their tone tends to be melancholy and mournful. Again, sort of these more traditional ways of thinking about grief. And a lot of times, elegies can be very intimate, vulnerable, and may talk about the last moments with the person. And the elegy, traditional elegy was written in three parts. So you have the lament part, where you're lamenting and allowing the emotions around, the sadness of losing this person, or the loss in general, whatever it is that that is you're choosing to focus on. And there's also praise and admiration, again, for this person, and then ending with solace. So it's kind of like a wrapping things up, and maybe finding some sort of peace with the loss of this person. And again, this is really talking about more of a traditional elegy, which the poems that we're gonna look at, I think in some ways, yeah, they some of them can definitely be seen as more in the elegy category. But I don't have any like traditional elegies. Those are I think I wanted to have us to dive into a little bit more of contemporary work. But if you're interested in looking at more traditional elegies, definitely encourage you to, you can definitely find them online. But I did want to just give a little bit of a background of an elegy, and I think that, again, I'm big into expanding things beyond their traditional definitions, and so I think that, you can write an elegy for some for the any of the historical and current global events that have happened and are happening, as well. It doesn't necessarily just have to be for a specific person, even though that is sort of the more traditional way of looking at an elegy.